I think this is one of the most important dates in FLITSCH's company history. We're adding a new location to our portfolio, a unique event.
Das ist ja einmalig.
This is a milestone in the company's history. On the eve of our 100th anniversary, we're set to acquire a property as a location for future growth.
Für weiteres Wachstum.
The cable trunking division and the adjacent sections are moving. So about 100 of our 293 workers will be working at this new location. It suits us perfectly. We're both extremely happy to be able to take this decision for FLITSCH.
Ja, wenn man mal die Anfänge sieht.
In the early days, FLITSCH was a turning plant, a contract turning plant, producing articles needed at the onset of electrification.
Elektrifizierung.
Ernst Fletch had a partner who worked in wholesale and could tell him what purchase prices the competitors were charging. And then he copied things. His father-in-law owned a pigsty, and that was where he started production with machines and things. In 1942, he saw Bockhacker's former cloth factory in Hückeswagen, which was empty and in need of repair. The roof was in ruins, and he asked the mayor about buying it. It was much too big for him, but he set up production in 1/3 of it. The company started producing electrical products, and then we learned how to make cable glands. Since we were using a lot of brass for electrical engineering, it made sense to make cable glands out of it. A Swedish client asked FLITSCH to produce a component using turning technology, prompting them to develop their own product.
Eigenes Produkt zu entwickeln.
That was the beginning of our transformation into a world market leader.
Ja, Sie müssen sich vorstellen, alles hinter.
You have to imagine everything behind me as a green meadow. The river Wupper flowed just behind the founder's house, and facing it was our turning shop. This had been a cloth factory which Ernst Fletch purchased when it was vacated. In the 60s, a warehouse was added at right angles to the turning shop, and that was the extent of our premises. The administration was also housed there, and it was only later, when the garage moved out of their building, that the first part of an administration building could be acquired, which was then gradually extended. Those were the only buildings in those days. Everything else was added later.
Das waren die einzigen Gebäude damals. Alles andere ist dazugekommen in den Jahren danach.
Since we needed space, the premises in Hückeswagen had to grow. But we were surrounded by private houses and the River Wupper. Then we benefited from the fact that the local water authority decided to build a dam to store the river water. So they had to drain a bend in the Wupper.
Das war ja eigentlich ein Glücksfall.
Actually, we were fortunate that the water authority straightened the river because we were able to buy additional land. The riverbed, which had originally run through the company site right behind Ernst Fletch's house, now had to be relocated, resulting in extensive building work being carried out. Construction work was going on everywhere. Everything was being changed and we had to store so much more material. It was awesome. New machines also had to be purchased because our Unidicht universal seal was having such an impact on the market.
And then a new access road was built leading onto Mühlenweg, giving us enough space for the cable trunking area, the third part of the company. So all three divisions were completely separate from one another. The turning shop an older facility in the Bockhacker buildings, the plastic section on the banks of the Wupper, all of which had been newly built, and finally the cable trunking building.
Dann eben die Kabelkanalhalle.
Then someone said I should get in touch with Flitsch. They were looking for a lathe operator. I thought, where on earth is Flitsch? Anyway, I decided to give it a try in March 1967. Mr. Otto Fletch, who was the managing director at the time, shook hands with me and said I could start the very next day, just like that. Back then, you know, it was all a bit basic. I thought, you won't be able to stand that. You won't last 4 weeks. And I was there for 43 years.
Am 1.7.75.
I started on July the 1st, 1975. Mr. Flitch walked around the plant with me, and I looked around, and he said, "You can do whatever you want here. You can even tidy the place up, just as long as something gets done." When I got home after my first day, I said to my wife, I won't stick it out for 3 weeks. But I ended up working there for 33 years. Otto Fletch was a very agreeable man to work for and practical as well. He'd walk around the factory asking, "How's it going? How are you? Try it this way," and things like that. He had to see everything with his own eyes.
Einmal kam zu mir an.
One day he asked me if everything was going all right, and I replied, "Well, Mr. Flitch, to be frank, I could use a new machine, a new production machine." Because at that time I was involved with planning. We had a lot to do and we couldn't deal with the capacity. He said, nodded and went away. 2 days later he came back and said, "Mr. Persian, I've bought you the new machine."
Ich habe eine neue Maschine gekauft.
He was, how can I put it, one of the old school of businessmen. He always made sure that the sales figures were in the black, but he wasn't really out to get much bigger. He said, "This is the basis of the business. I'll develop it properly, I'll look after my employees," and that was the most important thing for him. And if someone he knew from Hückeswagen was looking for a job, there was no problem at all. They could start work the next day. That's how many people started out here. They didn't have a written contract, but there was a verbal agreement. That's how it was. He kept his word.
Das war auch so, sein Wort stand dann.
Als ich da anfing, hatte der Otto Fletch.
When I started working there, Otto Fletch still wore a grey work coat, and you could often see him at one of the machines. He wasn't one of those self-important people. He always helped out, even when a customer came to order screw fittings. Sometimes we would stay on longer in the evenings, and he would help out. That was the positive side of things. He wasn't the big boss, but just like any other employee. He was always there if you needed anything, and if you had any worries or problems, then you could talk to him. He always said, "There's no works committee here. If you need a works committee, you'll find it in my office on the second floor." And everything worked smoothly. But at the end of the day, you knew he was the boss.
Was ihm immer sehr wichtig war, meinem Großvater, war...
The staff and the people who worked here were always very important to my grandfather, because they were the ones who physically did the work on which the company's achievement was based. I think my grandfather's legacy was the sense of togetherness in the company, so there were no problems regarding contact between different parts of the organization. He managed to achieve this by holding company parties, by organizing events, by having people rotate around the company, by allowing regular exchanges to take place. And I believe that this spirit of cooperation, which is so firmly anchored in the company, is something we continue to benefit from today. I had a very close relationship with my grandfather. He was a mentor for me. I think that relatively early on it was important to him that I would succeed him here in the company, and that's why we had such a good relationship.
Seine Tochter, die Ute Fletch.
His daughter, Ute Fletch, was just as good a person as her father. Everyone called her the life and soul of the Flitsch company. You could take any problem to her, just like her father, and that made her so special, if you ask me. Unfortunately, she died when she was quite young. We had a range of cable gland products called Unidicht, invented by Otto Fletch, which we had a patent on. Nobody could imitate them, and nobody was allowed to imitate them. They were replaceable seals, which were injection molded, watertight and oil-tight, and of course that was a breakthrough in the mechanical engineering industry, so our sales increased rapidly. I remember the universal screw fitting had only been on the market for 2 years, and of course I made all the injection tools. At that time the fittings were still individually injected using plastic. So I turned a mould out of solid material, a brass hexagon, then the thread was put in, a core was inserted, and then it would go under the injection machine, be injected with plastic, and then taken out again. Well, we were the Mercedes-Benz of screw fittings, that's what I always called us, in terms of price as well as quality. If someone wanted something special, something good, he said, "Let's buy Flitsch." You could get run-of-the-mill screw fittings over the counter anywhere, but you got our fittings through wholesalers. They were rarely sold directly to the end customer. Our main customers were the mechanical engineering industry, the car industry, and the breweries. Then we invested and brought in new machines. Not just one, but quite a few. First, single-spindle automatic lathes, and then around 1980-81 we got the first 6-spindle automatic lathes from Gildemeister, and it was amazing. We could produce a screw fitting every second, whereas previously each screw fitting had taken 30 seconds, one screw fitting per machine. And now the new machines made one screw fitting every second, which was sensational. You can't possibly imagine it. At first we thought we'd never be able to sell that many, but it all worked out. I started working for the company in 1971 as a sweeper, to use a soccer term. I talked to my uncle about what we could do and what was needed. He told me that it would be my job to acquire new customers, develop new products, new ideas, and do new things.
Harald joined the firm in the middle of his undergraduate studies. And first of all, he did the round of various companies before establishing business contacts with Ford, which became a major customer for our universal seal. It was Harald's idea to expand our range of hoses and clamps. And so our product portfolio grew and the number of product developments increased.
And then things really took off, because Harald Fletch was a completely different kind of person from Otto Fletch. Otto looked after the company, while Harald was mostly on the road getting the orders in. I was interested in both the technical side and the marketing and management as such. And during that time I created our first catalogue. I wasn't married. And I had time to work on it in the evenings. So that was when our first 18-page catalogue of fittings came out. And that was the beginning of our success. Otto was only interested in screw fittings, Flitsch fittings, the best on the market. But Harald said, "What about cable trunking? We've got to have a second string to our bow." Otto was against it, but it turned out that Harald was right again.
In den 70er Jahren war es eben so, dass diese Unidicht.
During the 70s, the Unidicht seal was unbeatable, and our production and turnover increased dramatically. Then in the 1980s, Harald Fletch introduced the cable trunking system, He went to England and came back and said, "I've just seen something new over there. They're producing cable trunking." And for a laugh I said, "Mr. Flitch, we don't need cable trunking, we make cable glands." So he said, "Just you wait and see. They're the coming thing."
Passen Sie mal auf, das wird kommen.
He was on the road a lot, and of course he saw other companies from the inside, and when he came back he always said, "Peter, we're just a small-time operation, things will have to change." Then with his uncle's permission, he started expanding. My main worry was that I had to come up with an idea that would be the basis for growth, so it had to be of interest to the whole market, because otherwise my uncle would have said, "There you go, the university graduate is up to his tricks again. Ideas which don't work and won't make a profit." I had to make sure that didn't happen. And if anything came up, we talked about whether it was feasible, could we do it from the production point of view, screw fittings, new developments and so on. We were always making improvements.
He had a way of mesmerising people with his ideas. When he said something, it always got done. When my father said something, well, that's a different story. My father was always a very accommodating employer. He was very concerned about the well-being of his employees. Back then, he knew everyone by name. He would ask about someone's husband or about their grandchildren, and he always had a helping hand for an employee whose bank account was in the red. They could always get a loan from the company.
Otto Fletch was in the background, making sure that the company was performing well economically. Harold was the one who kept driving it forward, and so things worked out perfectly. Otto Fletch held the business together, and Harold Fletch went on creating new things.
Und der eine, der immer neue Dinge kreiert, Harald Fletch.
Harald wusste also sehr
Harold knew a lot about the industrial sector.
viel.
He knew where the problems were. When I was working there, he was always thinking 3 or 4 steps ahead about what we were capable of doing. And I'd say, "Yes, Mr. Fletch, but first I have to do the selling." And he'd say, "I'll make sure you have even more to sell in 5 years."
Ich besorge, dass Sie in 5 Jahren noch mehr verkaufen.
I was a youngster back then, and I thought to myself, okay, I'll take care of the day-to-day business, and my boss will take care of the rest. He's always been able to see how things will turn out.
Geschäft, was in den nächsten Jahren kommen wird, gesehen.
I can still recall one particular situation. I used to have unfinished projects lying on my desk, and my uncle didn't like that at all. He preferred an empty desk, so I told him, "These projects are worth 5 million. The papers aren't going anywhere, they're staying right here." "But it looks terrible," he'd say. "Listen," I said, "this project here is at the 30% stage, and this one is 60% complete, and this one here the customer can't quite make up his mind about. So each of the products is at a different stage. I won't clear my desk, those papers are going to make us money." And then he looked at them with more respect. And in the end, when I had just had 25 projects up and running, he didn't ask any more questions. He just let me get on with it.
Viel engere Beziehung?
I had much more in common with Harold Fletch, who was very technically minded like me. He was always encouraging us to develop things technically, to make things run better, to expand the product range. He'd say, "Don't just sit around, do it." And we did. And that is how the whole thing has evolved the way it has.
Massiv entwickelt.
He didn't argue with his employees either. He always said, "I don't pull rank on you, do I?" "Of course not," I would say. He was the managing director, but he let people do their job. He assigned the tasks, and then he let people get on with them. And afterwards he'd inquire how things were going, and either everything was okay, or something had to be improved.
Harold
was always full of ideas that would come to him in the middle of the night. His shirt pocket was always full of memos he had made on scraps of paper during the night. He used to get up early in the morning to read the trade papers, and when he came down, he was full of new ideas, and sometimes the ideas came too fast for the people to keep up with. Then you had to tell him, listen, if I had an extra arm, I could run away and join the circus.
Das Betriebsklima war eigentlich immer gut.
Actually, the atmosphere was always good at work. It was good with Otto Fletch, and it was good with Harald Fletch.
Einfach
Harald was the one who had more ideas, and when he came along, you knew we were in for something new. And then a couple of people got on with it right away and made it happen.
dass dann
Sometimes we'd say, oh no, here comes Harald with another new idea, especially on Monday mornings. But most of the ideas actually worked out. That's the beauty of it.
aber die meisten Ideen sind sogar was geworden, das ist das Schöne dabei.
Der Stil,
Harald Fletcher's style was very distinctive.
man merkte schon, dass
The change that was taking place in the company was quite noticeable. It was becoming more focused on products and markets and less on production and processes.
da ging es erst
The goal was to acquire orders, to inspire customers, to establish ourselves as a leading producer in the market, not only as a contract manufacturer, but also as an innovative technological leader. I believe that Harald Fletch was the most significant player within the company in the development of the Fletch brand.
einen sehr, sehr hohen Beitrag zu geleistet, also den höchsten eigentlich im Unternehmen.
Harald war der Regisseur.
Harald was the stage manager of the firm, and that was a good thing because it was thanks to him that we expanded so much.
Wir auch so gewachsen. Wie wir angefangen haben, waren wir 30.
When we first started, there were 30 of us. That was the entire company.
Es gab ja nur ein Gebäude
There was just the one building.
und da drin war auch
There was the room where the machines were, the section for the fitters and the lathe, and the shipping department was in the same room too.
eine Drehbank, dann gab es
There was another room for the assembly section, where the women assembled the screw fittings. And the office was in that room as well.
und das Büro war natürlich auch in dem Raum.
Wir waren eine kleine
When we started out, we were just a small company manufacturing cable glands. And then we expanded when we began to produce cable trunking.
eine Halle gebaut.
At first, we built just the one production unit. But since then, 4 or 5 more units have been added, and we're still getting bigger and bigger. We had no idea that the volume of production would be so huge.
Man hat viel
Most of the pre-war, post-war buildings were gradually demolished, and practical, very modern industrial structures were erected.
zweckmäßig war.
The automatic small parts store is very important. If a customer says, I want a cable gland on my desk within 24 hours,
Kabelverschraubung auf meinem
that's what we have to ensure.
herstellen. Früher war es so,
In the past, the customer went to the goods, so that transit was very time-consuming.
hoch.
Nowadays, the goods come to the customer, so that the process is significantly quicker. We have about 25,000 storage bins in operation, and we can increase our capacity even further.
Wir waren sozusagen freischaffende Künstler. Wir haben versucht, den Markt zu finden. Wir haben den
In a sense, we were freelance artists. We sought out the market, and we conquered it with our products. Our market philosophy was defined by means of our products. Keep it simple. That's what's behind our success story.
so. Das war die große Erfolgsgeschichte daran.
Das macht erstmal sehr viel Spaß, wenn man also immer nach oben geht.
It's great if you're on the way up.
Lohn gezahlt? Oder?
I must say that Flitch paid a good wage, and that it still does.
Und der Zusammenhalt in der Firma,
The team spirit in the company was very good in the early years. There was hardly any staff turnover at all.
Fluktuation,
So when someone left the firm,
jemand ging,
people were surprised. When you worked for Flitch, you were happy to be there and to be on the team and to be able to do a good job.
gut arbeiten konnte.
Dadurch, dass
Since Flitch is a family-owned company, it's always had a personal approach, and this was very important to me. That meant you were always treated as an individual. I really liked their personal approach and the family environment, and it's still the same today. They do all they can to encourage it, and this is what sets the company apart from others.
Also was mich so lange hier gehalten hat, ist, dass der Job...
The reason I was here for so long is that I liked the job so much. I enjoyed going to work and got on well with my colleagues, who became really good friends. And everything was so nice here that it kept me going for 40 years. I always felt at home here. Things couldn't have been better.
Es hätte mir nicht besser gehen können.
What I always valued was the way the boss used to go around talking to everyone, asking them how they were doing. You really had the feeling that you were part of the company, part of the family. In those days, this personal relationship with the boss was much stronger.
Wir versuchen, dass die Mitarbeiter Freude.
We try to ensure that our employees enjoy their work, which means them having enough leeway to try things out, and us listening to their ideas. If they want a new machine, we listen to what they say and assess things, and if it makes sense to us, of course, we buy it. Just like the machine behind me, which we've only recently purchased. That was another technological leap forward.
Das war auch wieder ein Technologiesprung.
In the 1980s, Otto Fletch told us that we were going to exhibit at the Hanover Trade Fair, which was new ground for us. We rented 40 or 50 square meters for our stand, and we had our own carpenter's workshop where a lot of the work was done. And then we took the stand up there in our own truck and set it up ourselves.
Leuten hingebracht und selbst aufgebaut.
Wir haben ja viele Messen miteinander gemacht.
A team of us worked at the trade fairs, and Harold's wife was always helping to keep up a morale on the stands, because a trade fair is an enormously exhausting business.
Enorm anstrengende.
He always said to us that we had to get something out of it personally. We weren't just there to travel, to work, and to please customers. Each of us had to get something out of it for ourselves.
Etwas für sich persönlich dabei mitnehmen.
Hatte ewig neue Ideen.
He was always coming up with new ideas. He had a glass floor installed in our booth, and people were afraid to tread on it. Then he had the same glass floor laid in the new reception area downstairs, with a few of our products arranged around it. And people who had never seen the floor before were frightened to walk on it.
Über diesen Boden zu gehen.
Und diese Prüferei.
And all this testing was one of my hobbies.
Ein Hobby von mir.
We did everything precisely, recorded all the results, wrote protocols, took photos, and provided whatever documents were necessary. And that was crucial to our being approved by other companies.
Von den Firmen.
Things were always being improved and refined to meet the requirements of the market, and things were getting better for us too. Lots of things were changing, the testing situations themselves, tests being carried out by the customers, tests at the testing institute, and the normative specifications themselves, so we had to keep up with things and improve our products. I believe we are very, very good at implementing our customers' ideas in a relatively short time, not least because we have our own test laboratory which can carry out tests on behalf of our customers. So we're significantly faster than our competitors.
Ja, ich habe immer bewundert, wie frühere Firmenchefs.
I've always admired how CEOs such as Mr. Klingelnberg or Mr. Hart have supported the local community. I think that's extremely important, and that's what I've been doing all these years.
Und das habe ich also
I once said for a laugh, it's no fun just manufacturing screw fittings. So when the Klingelnberg company decided to pull out of the partnership with a local secondary school, I supported the school with a new partnership agreement.
unterstützt. Ja, und,
I've always tried to do some good when the opportunity arose, and it was financially viable.
die Möglichkeit ergab und das finanziell realisierbar war. Unser Bürgermeister ist ja auch
The mayor is very pleased with our company too, and he certainly benefits from it.
Die
The owners of the company have always been very committed to Hückeswagen. They don't just have their own company's well-being in mind, but also the development of the town. And I'd like to emphasize something else. Almost 300 people are employed by PFLITSCH at the moment, which means there are a lot of families in Hückeswagen and beyond who live and work for PFLITSCH and who influence the character of our town as a result. Thanks to PFLITSCH, the products made here are exported all over Europe, all over the world, and they spread the name of Hückeswagen. That's something which should not be underestimated. These days we get applications from people living as far away as Leverkusen and Lüdenscheid. They know about PFLITSCH because of the advertising we do. We've established a reputation which we didn't have before. In those days people had never even heard of PFLITSCH, that little company on Mühlenweg. No one had any idea what we did, but all that has changed radically. We have very experienced and well-established staff who have a lot of know-how. We've been able to hire new employees who are in a position to acquire this know-how from them and develop it further.
Mitarbeiter sind schon das wichtigste Kapital.
Our employees are our most important asset. They are more important than the equipment and the machinery we have. Of course, we have capital tied up in them, but the know-how is in our employees' heads, and we only benefit from this if they share it with others, which they do.
Teilen und das tun.
I'd say it's an incredibly social company as far as the employees' well-being is concerned. Whether it's vouchers for the gym, swimming vouchers, or meal vouchers, there's an unbelievable number of goodies for the employees. Family celebrations, holiday bonuses, Christmas bonuses, childcare facilities, and things like that. It all adds up. It's the personal touch and the team spirit among colleagues. One hand washes the other, so in the evenings we'd sometimes work a bit longer, which was to be expected. I always enjoyed my time there. I never had a day when I didn't feel like coming in.
Lag auch am Otto Fletch, an der Familie Fletch.
It was all down to Otto Fletch, the Fletch family, and Harald.
Hat gepasst.
That was just the way it was. Everything was fine. Otherwise I wouldn't have stayed here for 33 years.
Das ganz wichtig ist.
It is very important not to be just a faceless company, but to be one with a personal history. In other words, our background is based on everything that has happened over the decades.
Jahrzehnte.
You have to be conscious of your tradition. You can't do without history.
Ohne Historie geht's nicht.
Harald and Otto Fletch have cultivated very fertile soil, so there'll be plenty of fruit in the years to come. You can tell that from the current figures, because what's being harvested now comes from soil that was cultivated years ago. Ultimately, the secret of the company's success is based on our continuous development, pushing to open up ever more new fields of technology. But we must also keep promoting the PFLITSCH brand abroad and participate more actively in market developments there. We want to continue to be leaders both in terms of technology and quality. We do not want to abandon our predecessors' policy, but rather be increasingly acknowledged as a provider of solutions. The two managing directors are set to keep the company developing along these lines, and I think the company is well on its way to achieving its aim.
Die wollen auch, dass es weitergeht und dass die Firma wächst.
They want the company to continue to grow.
Das ist der zweite Harald.
And Mr. Lenzing is a very strong-willed person too. He's a second Harold. And Matthias, we're on a first-name basis, is just the same. I think he's a very social person, they both are, and that's good for everyone.
Das passt schon.
They've always kept their feet on the ground, never had impossible or unrealistic dreams. That's what makes the company what it is, the reason why it's still a family-run business.
Wir sind jetzt mittlerweile eine Weltfirma.
I'm glad to see that we've become a global company. When the company is doing well, the employees benefit.
Der Firma noch weitere 100 Jahre.
I'd like to wish the company all the best for the coming 100 years. Best wishes to our two bosses, our new bosses, and all the best to Harold.